have been burying the Epstein lead. Or should I say, we have been burying the Trumpstein lead. Trump has sued Rupert Murdoch over the Jeffrey Epstein Bondi letter story, a comparatively trivial story. He has now sued him officially for $20 billion. Rupert Murdoch. He has sued Rupert Murdoch, the one man who has done more than anyone else to enable Trump, to clear the path for Trump's dictatorship, to destroy American democracy after destroying British democracy and Australian democracy, and to ultimately, presumably save Trump from being institutionalized by his own family as his mind had grown softer and softer and his business touch had grown worse and worse. He's suing that guy. And he's suing him amid rumors throughout the television and print news industries that Murdoch, especially the Wall Street Journal, has more on Trump and Epstein and Trumpstein and is vetting that more and shaping it as we speak. He's suing what we used to call the guy who owns all the ink. Genius. Genius, I tells you. He's putting Rupert Murdoch in a position in which, soon or late, to survive, for Murdoch's News Corp empire to survive, for his children to survive, Murdoch or his heirs will have to destroy Trump. He is making the Epstein story, the Trumpstein story, existential for Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, who still programs Fox News, who could take Fox News off the air tomorrow or turn it against Trump tomorrow, or even if his own family or board members tried to stop him, Rupert could still throw all of Fox News and News Corp and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post into chaos. It could cost him $787 million just to settle this, the way the Dominion Voting Systems lawsuit settlement did. And more importantly, a lot of his remaining limited time on this earth could cost Murdoch at minimum a money-making franchise like the Tucker Carlson Crazy Town Hour. This is how Murdoch sees it. Trump suing Murdoch. It's like Jesus suing John the Baptist. No, I like the good publicity. And it guarantees that the Epstein story is never, ever going away. Jesus suing John the Baptist, Epstein story never going away, Epstein story becoming the Trumpstein story. There's only one word for that. Thank you, Nancy Faust. Trump's mental problems are really cresting at a truly unfortunate time for him, because it is apparent he has forgotten what happens in a lawsuit when you sue somebody. Quote, I look forward to getting Rupert Murdoch to testify in my lawsuit against him and his pile of garbage newspaper, the WSJ. That will be an interesting experience! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Trump seems to have forgotten that in such a lawsuit, he would also have to testify, or at least give a deposition for days. There is reason to suspect this lawsuit will go away at some point, but not until after it has destroyed Trump. Also, his lawyers apparently do not understand the English language. From the lawsuit, item 16, the article was published in the Wall Street Journal as an exclusive. However, since publication, defendants have widely disseminated it to hundreds of millions of people worldwide. It appears one of Trump's lawyers thinks the word exclusive means it's a secret, or it's some kind of news story that nobody is allowed to read, or quote, or mention, or just when you thought Emil Bovee and Alina Habba were the bottom of the barrel. Oh, look, Another barrel underneath that barrel. By the way, there is an Epstein client list. That also factors into this. From The Hill, written by Chris Truax, who used to be a campaign official with John McCain. Oops, some people remember things. He writes, quote, there is a list of clients related to the billionaire sex offender's underage trafficking charges, and its existence is a matter of public record. We know that Pam Bondi's carefully crafted memo claiming that there is no Epstein client list, the quotation marks are in the memo, is also nonsense. As an aside, that's Pam Bondi, the Florida Attorney General, who didn't prosecute Epstein. Back to Chris Truax in The Hill. There might not have been a, quote, client list in the FBI's Epstein files, but the FBI certainly has compiled a list of clients. When the FBI raided Epstein's New York mansion, they seized a vast amount of material. In a court memo filed on July 8, 2019, 2 days after his arrest, the Department of Justice outlined some of the evidence they had seized. This includes stacks of compact discs labeled Young Name plus Name. In short, Epstein kept a carefully curated library of videos showing various people having sex with underage women. It's a contradiction in terms there. They're not underage women. They're girls. Even if Epstein was not actively blackmailing anyone, he sure seems to have had plenty of insurance at the ready. Bondi admits that Epstein harmed over 1,000 victims. But we also know that once a part of Epstein's system, his victims were trafficked several times. Virginia Giuffre, for example, described being sexually trafficked multiple times over 2 years in New York, Palm Beach, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and London. Let's say that each victim was involved on average in 5 incidents. Mr. Truax writes, that's over 5,000 encounters. It's safe to assume this wasn't all Epstein, and with over 1,000 victims to interview and piles of DVDs labeled with perpetrators' names, the FBI and Pam Bondi know exactly who was involved. So there is an Epstein client list, and Pam Bondi has it, and her defense appears to be that it does not have the words client list written on it in crayon by Epstein. To add to this, ABC News reported, quote, the only newly released document in that Phase 1, that was the libs of TikTok, DC Drano, stupid loose-leaf notebook folders thing, which received little public attention, was a 3-page catalog of evidence that appears to be an accounting of evidence seized during the searches of Epstein's properties. The 3-page index is a report generated by the FBI. According to it, the remaining materials include 40 computers and electronic devices, 26 storage drives, more than 70 CDs, and 6 recording devices. The devices hold more than 300 gigabytes of data, according to the Department of Justice. The evidence also includes approximately 60 pieces of physical evidence, including photographs, travel logs, employee lists, more than $17,000 in cash, 5 massage tables, 4 busts of female body parts, a pair of women's cowboy boots, and 1 stuffed dog. There is an Epstein client list, and it's 300 gigabytes of data and 70 CDs and 6 recording devices and 40 computers. And in short, I have kept a record of almost every broadcast I have done since the year 1975, and I'm often mocked for it. And my record, compiled over 50 years, is about 1/1000th the size of the records that Jeffrey Epstein kept of his own crimes. There's an Epstein client list. Not only that, but there's an Epstein client list library. The polling on this is extraordinary. The public does not believe Donald Trump about Epstein. On Thursday, a Reuters Ipsos poll showed that his handling of this received approval by 17% of all Americans and only 35% of Republicans. The conclusion, and again, this is last Thursday, that the government is hiding information on Epstein's death was up to 60% among all adults, 55% of Republicans. The government is hiding Epstein's alleged client list. 69% said yes. 62% of Republicans said yes. That was last week. CBS YouGov came out with a new poll yesterday finding that 75% of Americans are now in disapproval of how the administration is handling matters related to Epstein. And the percentage that wants the Justice Department to release all the information it has on the case, not just some grand jury testimony, all of it, 89%. So not only are the polls terrible for Trump, but they have gotten exponentially worse since last Thursday. And don't be distracted by the tut-tutting here from the Washington Post about how this hasn't really showed up among MAGA. There's no indication so far that this is the scandal that will sink Trump any more than the Access Hollywood tape of 2016. Or being found guilty in a criminal trial last year over hush money payments to a porn star. What is forgotten there is the context. When the Access Hollywood tape dropped, Trump was not president. When the Stormy Daniels trial played out, Trump was not president. And neither Access Hollywood nor Stormy Daniels was the wet dream conspiracy theory that keeps Trump's base together. This story is never going away. And the person doing the most to make sure it never goes away is Trump. And he is now assured that the second person on that list of who's making sure it never goes away is Murdoch. He's doing everything he can to keep it from going away, and not just by suing Murdoch. Senator Dick Durbin, who woke up from his 100-year slumber, says Bondi was told to flag Trump references in the files. In other words, find them and get rid of them. You then pressured the FBI to put approximately 1,000 personnel in its Information Management Division under the Freedom of Information Act and Privacy Act on 24-hour shifts to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records in order to produce more documents than could be arbitrarily released on a short deadline. This effort, which reportedly took place from March 14th through the end of March, was haphazardly supplemented by hundreds of FBI New York field office personnel. They literally pulled FBI agents off the street, according to Durbin's letter to Pam Bondi, to get all the information that she now says doesn't exist. And again, we're looking at something the size of the New York Public Library that is all pertaining to Epstein and all the people he knew, including Donald Trump. But it doesn't exist. My office was told that these personnel were instructed to flag any records in which President Trump was mentioned. He asks, why were personnel told to flag records in which President Trump was mentioned? A, please list all political appointees and senior DOJ officials involved in the decision to flag records in which President Trump was mentioned. B, what happened to the records mentioning President Trump once they were flagged? C, is there a log of the records mentioning President Trump? If yes, please transmit a copy of the log to the committee. Flagging the Trump records. I am reminded suddenly of the great comedian and politician Eddie Izzard of England. How to found a new country. I claim this country for mine. Do you have a flag? Yes, I do. Oh, then it's yours. Please list all political appointees and senior DOJ officials involved in the decision to flag records in which President Trump was mentioned. Well, we have another library that just lists them. The scandal that this will continue to be, the cover-up possibilities, makes Watergate look like somebody cutting out 3 words from a 5,000-word document. The Watergate cover-up is shaping up to be nothing compared to the Trump-Epstein cover-up. And just as if more were needed here, since I last spoke to you, Trump has cleverly again insulted his own people and called them troublemakers. In a post, he repeated his request that grand jury testimony be released. And again, the grand jury testimony would only refer to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and some FBI agents summarizing what they knew. He pretends that his request for that grand jury testimony is new. He may have forgotten that he'd already done this. And then he seemed to have a glimmer of insight. You know about Shakespearean and, in fact, classic tragedy in which the victim hero realizes literally an hour too late his great mistake and speaks to it and then gets hit by a bus. The Shakespearean equivalent of a bus. Trump wrote, even if the court gave its full and unwavering approval, nothing will be good enough for the troublemakers and radical left lunatics making the request. It will always be more, more, more. Well, you got that right, Sparky. And you invoked the Andrea True connection, the theme song from Sex and the City. More, more, more. But what self-insight at the end? It will always be more, more, more. Exactly right. Donald Trump has turned this story, which could have been perhaps embarrassing to him, probably not. If the worst that they were ready to break out was that he wrote a bawdy letter or note or drew something that alluded vaguely to a secret that could have been which cologne works best on these women, it could have been anything. If that was the worst they had, in the Trump world, that would have lasted 6 to 8 hours. You wouldn't have even needed to see a physician. Instead, the rest of his life is going to be Trumpstein. Ultimately, Trump's furious and crazed response since just last Thursday has locked the Epstein story in. It will not go away. It is Trump-Epstein. It is Epstein-Trump. It is Trumpstein. Greg Sargent noted the fact that Trump has not stuck to one story. He listed the various stories and their evolution. In fact, I calculate Trump has not stuck to one story about Trumpstein for more than 72 hours. 1, Greg wrote, Dems manufacture idea that Epstein files contain explosive revelations about Trump. 2, Dems deliberately don't release the files because they know there's nothing in them about Trump. 3, once Trump takes over and Patel and Bongino find nothing in them, Dems cleverly manipulate countless MAGA influencers into demanding release of the files, knowing Trump will never release them, even though it would exonerate him. 4, MAGA influencers demand their release, having gotten snookered into carrying out the Dems' dastardly scheme. Cue the curling of the waxed mustache here. And 5 from the Greg Sargent list, Trump still opposes their release, and House Republicans vote against their release, even though it would exonerate him and reveal Dems are guilty of a massive hoax. And they do this because... Shrug emoji. I'll add 6. Added to the Greg Sargent list. Now it's only liberals demanding the release of the files. Not, 89% of all Americans, according to the CBS YouGov poll from yesterday. So there is an Epstein client list, and Pam Bondi has it, although it appears under another name like Epstein victim list, or Epstein evidence list, or Trumpstein client list, or list client Epstein. Pam Bondi has it. Trump has it. Trump is burying it. And Rupert Murdoch is working up another Trumpstein story as we speak. At least the rumor mill has that. And Trump is guaranteeing that the Trumpstein story will never die. And he is doing this by suing his number one advocate in the world since Roy Cohn died. Trumpstein now, Trumpstein forever. Genius. Genius, I tell you. I delete the CBS YouGov poll from yesterday, the non-Trumpstein headlines. In February, Trump had 59% approval on deportations by his ISIS mob. It is now 51% disapproval. From 59% approval to 51% disapproval. He's lost 12 points on deportations. 52% say more people are being deported than they expected. A CNN poll from yesterday shows only 26% favoring the detention facilities, the concentration camps, alligator moats. Trump's overall approval keeps dropping. It's down to 42.9%, first-term territory, underwater by nearly 11 points. His best issue is immigration. He's only underwater by 6 points on immigration. He's underwater on immigration. His worst number is on inflation. He's underwater by 24 points on inflation. So it's time to cue all the lies. The threats by Tulsi Gabbard to prosecute Obama and, I don't know, me? Who knows who she has in mind? Oh, right. Hey, Tulsi, skunkhead. Trump's concierge Supreme Court immunized all presidents. Oops. Also, your premise is wrong. Nobody ever accused Trump or Russia of altering the voting machines. All it says, even in Gabbard's own release, Russian and criminal actors did not impact recent U.S. elections by conducting malicious cyber activities against election infrastructure. Well, no kidding. They also did not manipulate the 2016 World Series. Nobody accused them of that. Obviously, Gabbard is conflating two stories, whether from her stupidity or deliberately, it's hard to tell. But the two stories are, one, what Russia really did for Trump in 2016, which was to facilitate the hacking of Democratic emails and feeding them to Trump via WikiLeaks, Russian collusion, which he asked for at that one summer news conference. Russia, if you're listening, which was, by the way, in response to a question from a then great reporter named Katie Tur. Should have circled that date and went, this is when she peaked as a journalist. There's that story, which happened, which, if you read the Mueller report, happened. And then there's the completely tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that Russians tampered with the actual voting machines via space lasers or something in 2016, which I believe was explored. I remember wondering about it, and it was dismissed within hours because there was no evidence, because we're evidence-based. But Gabbard is selling this as if it was one story altogether. Russia or not Russia. And disproving 0.5% of it disproves 100%. I don't think it's her stupidity, and boy, is she stupid. She really believes this, which raises the question, how do you get morons like Tulsi Gabbard to repeat and embellish and believe lies of this proportion? The methodology, as I understand it, is you give them the sketchy outline and you sort of force them to fill in the gaps to please their bosses. As it was explained to me by a former producer of mine who went to work for Fox News, the idiots on the air, the Harris Faulkners and such on Fox, are not told, say this, say this, say this. They are given the outlines of a story, the Will Cains, the morning morons. These people are given the outlines of stories, the Jesse Waters. They are given the outlines of something and basically told, just do your own research. And they go online and they find the first piece of crap they can find and they report that to please their bosses. That way, the boss can never have to say, well, I told him to say that they influenced the 2016 World Series. The Russians did that. They manipulated the seventh game. I never said that to them. So their hands are clean. And more importantly, if you are telling a story like this to please your bosses, you are going to believe it because believing it is the essence of you holding your job. There is an example that I know of secondhand from one of the perpetrators, one of the producers who did this to an unfortunate, well-meaning weatherman who they made into a newscaster in New York. I was told this story in the early 1990s. It's dating to the 1980s and the death of the playwright Tennessee Williams. I'll leave his name out of it. I'm sure this is searchable somewhere. Have fun. They didn't like him doing the news, and they didn't like him particularly, and so these two producers decided to trip him up on the death of Tennessee Williams, cat on a hot tin roof, etc. They stood around his desk, and in seeming conversation that had nothing to do with him, they kept mentioning how Tennessee Ernie Williams had died. The reference was to a singer from the 1950s and 60s named Tennessee Ernie Ford, who did a memorable version of 16 tons. You do 16 tons, like that. They decided to try to make this anchor conflate Tennessee Williams and Tennessee Ernie Ford. And they came back and did it again just before the 5 o'clock news. And sure enough, the guy goes on the air and announces and knows he's doing something special that his bosses will be happy about, because clearly somebody has left out the name Ernie. They've just written Tennessee Williams. No, his name was Tennessee Ernie Williams. I did my own research. Good evening. The great American playwright Tennessee Ernie Williams is dead. I'm happy to say they suspended the anchor for a day or two, but I'm sure to this day he believes that Tennessee Ernie Ford, 16 tons, and Tennessee Williams, I've always relied on the kindness of strangers, are the same damn person. Speaking of stupid, there's Representative Anna Paulina Luna, real name Mayhoff. Thank you, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and then another tag, Pam Bondi. While others were busy trying to knife the president, this was quietly in the works behind the scenes, blah, 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 releasing the grand jury testimony. She's thanking Pam Bondi in a stupid off between herself and Pam Bondi for releasing stuff that doesn't pertain to anybody except Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But here's the punchline. Here's the stupid. About what this is. This is phase 3, according to Anna Paulina Luna, of the revelations about Jeffrey Epstein. Enjoy phase 3, Anna Paulina Luna writes. It's going to be the coup d'etat. No, coup d'etat was January 6th, miss. You're thinking of another phrase, coup de grace. Tennessee Ernie Williams. One from a conservative writer named Luke We Are Changed, Luke Rudkowski. What if Donald Trump is being held hostage right now and forced to do these things? Do you think that's a plausible theory? That's a hostage who you release every, 10 minutes so he can make a speech or go do something? You think you got a guy standing behind him with a gat in his ribs? I don't know what's wrong with this, though. If Donald Trump's being held hostage right now, can we not begin negotiations as soon as possible? But, of course, the stupidest person in the room is always Donald Trump himself. This is from yesterday, 8:17 a.m., Truth Social. The Washington whatevers should immediately change their name back to the Washington Redskins football team. There is a big clamoring for this. Spoiler alert, there isn't. Likewise, the Cleveland Indians, one of the 6 original baseball teams with a storied past. Our great Indian people in massive numbers want this to happen. Their heritage and prestige is systematically being taken away from them. Times are different. Blah, 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 blah. Owners, get it done. This is how much he needs a distraction. He's going back to this one again. But I can't tell you how much is wrong factually. I mean, this literally is a delusion. In case you think Trump is not brain dead, this may be the strongest evidence yet. This one sentence. The Cleveland Indians, one of the 6 original baseball teams with a storied past. 1. There is no group called, known as, or constituting the 6 original baseball teams. In fact, that phrase there, one of the 6 original baseball teams, this is the first time I've even heard anybody make that mistake. And I have been a baseball historian since I was 8 years old. He must have dreamed it. Or 2, he had a dream based on the original 6 National Hockey League teams. Problem being, there also is no original 6 National Hockey League teams group. The misnamed original 6 from hockey consists of 1 team from the first year of the precursor of the National Hockey League, Montreal, the National Hockey Association. Another that is kind of one of those teams, Toronto, although there's some historical debate over whether or not that's the same franchise. Those 2 teams plus 4 expansion teams from the 1920s. That's hockey's original 6. It's a brand name. It doesn't mean anything. The NHL had 4 teams in its first year. At the end of World War I, it had 10 as late as 1931. It had 7 as late as 1942. It only had 6 teams from 1942 through 1967. And this has somehow been, in a game of telephone or game of misheard lyrics, this has been erroneously transformed into the original 6, which now Trump has transferred from hockey to baseball, where it's even more wrong somehow. 3, but back to Trump's delusion about the Cleveland Guardians. Original 6? The first baseball major league was founded in 1871. The American League, the league in which Cleveland plays and always has, was created in 1901, 30 years later. The Cleveland Blues were their first name. Then they became the Cleveland Naps after their star Nap Lajoie, and then in 1915 they became the Cleveland Indians. The term Indians is not only not some sort of baseball original 6, it's not even the original name of this Cleveland team. 4, with a storied past. No, I'm sorry. In 1899, Cleveland's old franchise, the Cleveland Spiders, lost 134 out of 154 games. They were so bad they stopped playing home games. They just went on the road and then disappeared forever. This newer team, the old Indians, they won the World Series in 1920 and 1948, and since then, nothing. Nice town, great fans, some great players. Laugh out loud past. I mean, no World Series since 1948. That's a more unstoried past than even the one World Series in the last 24 years, crap shack New York Yankees. Ugh. 5, finally. So who does Trump think constitutes baseball's 6 original teams? I'm just guessing because, as I said, it must have been a dream. Let's guess. Cleveland Indians, of course, and Montreal Canoodlemen, and of course the Yankees, and the New York Knights from the movie The Natural. And let's see, 2 more: the St. John Barons, and of course Chico's bail bonds. One quick reference to the cultural story of the moment. The Coldplay Canoodlers just moved from Montreal. Particularly this rash of articles and tisk pieces about how none of us should be mocking 2 people who managed to destroy their families and their careers at that concert. Seriously? Has anybody noticed that there is an insurance commercial running right now on television, postulating the mayhem caused by a stadium kiss cam if somebody were to kiss somebody else's wife? I mean, what just played out in real life is not original, not just not original. It was literally foretold by an insurance commercial. Don't you make fun of them? More importantly, they were at a Coldplay concert. Their lives were already over. Also of interest here, you may get mad at me for saying this, but I have to explain it. No, Stephen Colbert was not canceled just to appease Trump. That might be a side component to it, but no, Stephen Colbert was not canceled just to appease Trump. Stop giving Trump credit for this. Moreover, there is one inarguable and unanswerable fact that proves Stephen Colbert was not canceled just to appease Trump. That's next. This is Countdown.
George Carlin, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. This is the best news show ever. I told that to one of your producers, and I want you to know that. I've seen them all, and it's just, especially the first 35 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
It's just unparalleled.
I got bad news. Between you and I, we got 6 minutes to completely screw that into the ground.
Okay,
right?
That's good.
Still ahead on Countdown. Haven't done any Thurber lately. I think it is time to bring out the Thurber of all Thurbers, the greatest man in the world. Spoiler alert. He's now president of the United States on Mondays with Thurber. But first, postscripts to the news. Some headlines, some updates, some snark. This is the Countdown Podcast, and these are the places where there's news. Dateline, the Ed Sullivan Theater, New York. If you heard my bulletin Thursday night on Trump's Epstein cover-up and his escalation of that story into something that now cannot and will not ever go away, his attack on his own cult, you may have heard that as I was recording that bulletin, a different and separate story broke, and we included that in the bulletin, the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show by CBS. I want to revisit this after a couple of days of thinking about it, because virtually everything I have seen about the cancellation of the Colbert show since then, from those who are appalled by it and those who are gloating over it, has accepted on both sides without a second thought that Colbert was canceled as part of Trump's attack on dissent, as part of the new ownership there turning CBS into the proverbial whorehouse network, as Paddy Chayefsky had it described in his movie Network. It's not true. Well, it's true in part, but I'm going to say something to you that has already enraged friends of mine when I have said it to them. Not in large part. Stephen Colbert's show was not canceled because of Trump. Stephen Colbert's show was not canceled because he was critical of Trump. Stephen Colbert is not a martyr to criticism of Trump. If anything, this is the Phil Donahue cancellation story all over again. If anything, CBS may be using both Trump and Colbert to get away with this. Trump as an excuse for firing Colbert and shutting down that franchise. Colbert as a sacrificial lamb to appease Trump, a sacrificial lamb who they have been trying to sacrifice for several years now, and who I think they would have sacrificed even if Kamala Harris were president right now. And if not right now, then at the end of his contract next year. I understand this does not fit the narrative. And I confess I do not know the world of late-night television as well or as personally as I used to know the world of cable news when Phil Donahue was canceled and fired by MSNBC in 2003. I mean, when that happened, I was literally working at MSNBC. They asked me about it. They told me they were going to do it. They walked through the logic of it when it happened. But I do know the late-night TV world. I was on David Letterman's show 18 times. I was on Leno's show 3, 4, 5 times. Conan once. Fallon once. Snyder 3 times. Maher like 4 times. Hell, I may be the last living survivor of the late-night Pat Sajak show on CBS from the 80s. At least I'm the last one who still admits it. I still have friends who work in late-night television, and whatever I do not know, they sure do. It's happening to them. Late-night television is dying. And just as there was an unanswerable fact that disproved the idea that Phil Donahue had been canceled purely so NBC could obey in advance purely to censor anti-war commentary, to terrify dissenters. There is also a different but equally unanswerable fact that disproves this idea that Stephen Colbert has been canceled purely to obey in advance, purely to censor anti-Trump commentary, to terrify dissenters. In the Donahue case in 2003, the unanswerable fact was this. MSNBC sure canceled Phil Donahue's liberal show just as we went into Iraq. Canceled it in Phil Donahue's liberal 8 p.m. time slot. Canceled the whole operation, fired half the people, shut down the studio, ushered the live audience out of the building. And then they replaced Phil Donahue's liberal 8 p.m. show with me. I would argue modestly that 8 p.m. got more liberal at MSNBC, not less. Why in the hell would they go through all that to get rid of a liberal, only to put on a liberal who actually got ratings and made the network a success? Money. In the Colbert case, it's also money, and the unanswerable money fact comes in the form of a rhetorical question. They canceled Colbert last Thursday, effective next May? Next May? If you are repressing dissent, if you are martyring Stephen Colbert at the devil-worshipping altar of Donald Trump, why the hell are you letting him stay on the air for the next 10 months? For the next 10 months, he will be an uncontrollable lame duck, free to say almost anything about Trump, about Sherry Redstone, who now owns CBS, about this baboon Larry Ellison, about the deplorable and dishonest new CBS boss Jeff Shell, about what Trump is doing to media. What are they going to do to Colbert if he does say something like that? Something really bad? Fire him? Again? What if he waits a few months to collect the larger part of his $15 million salary and then blows them up at Christmas? If this were purely political purge, he would have been canceled effective that night. If they liked him, they would have said, okay, you can go on and say goodbye, and if you say anything wrong, we'll edit it out and replace it with, I don't know, what was the guy's name, the Letterman sidekick, Larry Sid Melman. You don't fire a guy because he rightly hates Trump and punish him because he rightly hates Trump and humiliate him because he rightly hates Trump and take away his career because he rightly hates Trump and then say to him, well, now go out there, son, and do the best hour-long satirical political interview show you can for the next 43 weeks. Go out there and give us the best 215 shows you can come up with. We'll just assume you won't do anything that'll embarrass us. We'll just assume you won't mention Trump at all in the next 43 weeks. Even if you think that Colbert, a uniquely stubborn individual, will play ball like that for $15 million after making $15 million for nearly 10 years, so he should have enough money to carry him through the rest of this and several other lifetimes. If you really think he is going to censor himself and just interview Renee Zellweger every night for the next 43 weeks, every night he's on the air just sitting there, starting with tonight's show, will be another red flag to the anti-Trump bulls. Every time you see Stephen Colbert, you will think he got canceled because of Trump. Why is he still on CBS if this really was about that? What are you trying to accomplish, and how have you just sabotaged that? If you're firing him to shut him up, he needs to shut up. I don't think it's that difficult, and I think we're overlooking the most obvious thing in the world. If they were firing him to keep him from making comments about Trump and to please Trump and to make think Trump make him believe he's running CBS, they would have taken him off the air. As an additional reminder, I'll point out, Stephen Colbert doesn't even have to blow up on CBS. He can say something to a reporter. He can say something at an event. He can wait, as I said, until next spring and say it then and get the money and say the nasty thing and blame Sherry Redstone and say, I don't know, Sherry Redstone is in the Epstein files. That's free for nothing. You can run with that, Stephen. I mean, he could keep his tongue till the contract runs out next May and spend the rest of his life attacking Trump. That's what I did at Fox. Fox took me off the air and expected I would be enraged and say something that would allow them not to pay me the remaining $1.25 million on my contract or whatever it was in the year 2001. And I looked at it and I said, are you people out of your minds? You're going to pay me this amount of money for the next 8 months. Then I get to say all these terrible things about you. You're expecting me to start saying it now because I feel like saying it now? I'll just hone the material. Colbert can spend the next 10 months practicing what he's going to do to Trump when his show is off the air. And you're underwriting it. CBS once had me play out my contract after they decided not to renew my contract, and I was on the air every night for, I think, 2.5 months on the local station in Los Angeles at a price to them of $500,000 a year, prorated, obviously. And they trusted me with doing the news. And not just the sports news. I anchored Magic Johnson's announcement that he had HIV. I was on the air from something that important live and unsupervised for 10 or 12 hours one day. And every other day I was on the news 3 times a day. And half an hour on Sundays. And after the football games. They trusted me to do it. They do sometimes let you run out your contract because they want to get something out of the money they're paying you. But you don't do that if you're expecting that you are silencing an evil, troublemaking, liberal bastard. The finances of this industry are terrible throughout television. There's almost nothing making money on network television. That's not a cover story. The online ad data firm Guideline reports that the networks' combined late-night show ad revenues in the year 2018 totaled $439 million. That's the ABC, CBS, and NBC shows. By last year, that figure, $439 million, was down to $220 million. Half. Colbert alone, that show, is making $50 million a year less in advertising revenue. Not profits, but in incoming money. $50 million a year less than it was 5 or 6 years ago. Doesn't matter that it's number one rated among the shows. If they're all terribly rated, being number one doesn't make much difference. And it's not political reasons that have driven the viewers away. It's not exclusive to him. The good shows and the bad shows based on ratings, metrics, or your personal opinion doesn't have anything to do with it. The reason late-night television made so much money over about a 40-year span was that its peak at a decade ago, it was the last thing left on TV outside of sports that drew the younger audience, viewers under 40. Viewers under 25, and they are now gone. Gone. They don't watch television at all, let alone Stephen Colbert at 11:35 at night after your late local news. They're gone. Colbert's audience, under the age of 50, is now 219,000 viewers a night. A tenth of his audience is in the so-called ad demo. In 2010, 219,000 younger viewers was a good, strong, kind of towards average night for young viewers for Countdown on MSNBC. That's how much the industry has changed. What used to be pretty good, but not spectacular for cable, we sometimes had 400,000 younger viewers or 300,000 younger viewers. 219,000 younger viewers? Okay, we did well. There wasn't anything particularly driving the news or whatever. 219,000 younger viewers was now the number one rating in late-night television. There's a point at which it no longer becomes worth turning on the lights or spending the money to broadcast in color rather than black and white. I mean, look at what happened to Seth Meyers. Last year, I think it was, first they cut back to 4 shows a week. 4 new shows a week and a rerun. Then they cut the work schedule back from 4 nights a week doing 4 shows to 3 nights a week doing 4 shows on most occasions. One day they would do 2 shows in one day. The staff was exhausted. And those were methods and changes made to try to preserve the franchise. I don't know if they proposed that to Colbert, to go to 4 nights a week or to go to 3 work days a week. Of course, Seth Meyers is next. Do you think Stephen Colbert's is the first CBS late night show or the first late night show to get canceled recently? You didn't know about the other one CBS canceled? A couple months ago? You didn't know about it because you never heard about it. It was called After Midnight, and it was on after Colbert. It was on at 12:30 a.m. And it ran for 199 episodes. Not 200, 199. They canceled it right before the milestone. They canceled it last month was the last episode. The host was Taylor Tomlinson. It was part talk show, part game show, and complete failure, not because of her, not because of the format, but because people are not watching at all. As the old gross joke used to go, you could take Christ fresh off the cross and put him on at 12:35 on CBS, and he wouldn't get an audience either. So Meyers is probably next. Not that there's anything wrong with what Seth does, nor his commentary being of value, but prepare yourself for that. He's on at 12:30, and if there's nobody watching at 11:30 to the point where the number one show at 11:30 gets canceled because it's no longer economically worth the trouble, the profits are insufficient. Well, obviously, the 12:30 shows are all going to go. The CBS one already went. What's left? The NBC one. Now, it could be that without Colbert in the picture, with just 2 shows on at 11:30, Fallon and Kimmel could gain just enough of his audience to survive, or maybe one of them will survive and the other one won't. It's hard for people to believe now after the glut of these shows, but until the end of the Johnny Carson regime and era, there was really only one network late-night talk show, and it was Carson's. They tried a Joey Bishop show on ABC, and as I mentioned, they later brought in Pat Sajak on the theory that Carson would retire soon, and Sajak would be the only one that was still on the air. Then people would see Sajak as, oh, he's the guy I'm familiar with. He's still on the air no matter who replaced Carson. Well, of course, Sajak sucked at it, so that blew that plan out the window. But there used to be only one late night show. We could get down to one late night show again. It could be Fallon. It could be Kimmel. Likelier than not, it'll be both of them. And the idea that Colbert's ratings were the highest means nothing. Live TV and information-based TV and studio-based TV, it's dying faster than the rest. The sports studio shows are dying. MSNBC was ballyhooing the growth in ratings in the Jen Psaki show. And I looked at the numbers and I was startled to see that her ratings now, after some growth, are up to about 75% of what my ratings were when I first went back on MSNBC in 2003 and nobody watched the network, and we were outrated by Fox by 10-1 and outrated by CNN by like 7-1. Right now, our terrible failures of 2003 are being put out in press releases by the same company because they're so comparatively good. Having the top ratings doesn't mean as much if your audience, your total audience, is 2,400,000 people a night. But it used to be 3,800,000 people a night. And starting 2 years ago, there was a sea change, literally in 1 month, June 2023. Nothing to do with Trump. I'd love to blame it on him. You know me. I'd love to. But right then, things changed. Streaming improved. The amount of shows available in other venues increased. Starting 2 years ago, the Colbert audience, the whole industry's audience, began to disappear, especially that younger audience. People also forget because who bothers to cover this stuff anymore? CBS has been trying to get out from under the expenses of that terribly expensive Colbert show for years. The Ed Sullivan Theater has been for sale for at least a couple of years. The last time I heard they were about to cancel Colbert, like the announcement was imminent, was November 2017. They were talking about it then. The year before was at least half spent with stories that they were about to flip-flop James Corden, who did the 12:30 show, and Colbert, because Colbert's ratings were so bad, he'd lost so much of what had been Letterman's audience that they weren't going to let him continue at 11:30 every night. It was a disaster. Then Trump came along and the ratings went up and they started to make some of that money back and they let him have his head, as they say, and that continued in pretty good form for CBS for 6 years, and then the bottom fell out 2 years ago. Now my caveat behind all this. I mentioned this in the special in the Bulletin on Thursday, but I should own up to it again in case you didn't hear that. I dislike Stephen Colbert intensely. I saw an internet meme with his picture and his chin on his hands, like it was glued there. And the meme part of it read, "This is what integrity looks like." Nonsense. Bullshit. Mean-spirited phony with almost no integrity at all. And the way I judge somebody, principally in that regard, is this. If you do them a favor, you can count on them to never remember it. I was asked to be a guest on his Comedy Central show when they weren't sure it was going to make it to 1 month, when they spun him off from Jon Stewart and nobody watched and nobody wanted to go on the show and they couldn't book anybody. And the guest booker was the wife of one of our regular Countdown guests, Jonathan Alter. Can you do me a favor? Can you do her a favor? Can she ask you to please come on? We'll explain the show to you. You'll be the only guest. It'll be good publicity for that audience. It'll be a great favor to us. And I was like, how many times have you been on the show, John? 25, 26. Okay, I owe you that at least. I don't know which number show it was, 4th, 5th, 7th. It was within the first 3 weeks of the Colbert rapport. Then I was asked to be a guest on his CBS demo, his second or third demo, the pilot, when they wanted to see if it would work in the newly rebuilt Ed Sullivan Theater. And he asked me, as I told the other day on the Bulletin podcast, he asked me what I was going to do with my career now that my ESPN2 show had just been canceled. And I said, honestly, Stephen, I don't know. If there's some things going on in news and in sports, and I don't know which. And he said, in front of a live audience, taping, although it wasn't going to be on the air, what did you do on Countdown when somebody gave you a bullshit answer like that? And I said to myself, I should just tell him to F himself and get up and leave, but it'll be on tape. Probably a bad idea. I said, honestly, I'm telling you the truth. If you don't like it, I can leave. That's not a problem. But I'm telling you the truth. I don't know what I was going to do. And I didn't. I asked to do a favor, go and do the favor, get told by the guy you're doing the favor for that you're lying to him. Then I was asked to do him a third favor. They asked me to come over and do this terrible bit, a comedy bit. The intro was pre-recorded, meaning our segment was pre-recorded. He was live. I saw him as he said this. Here's the man who's had more jobs than you've had hot dinners. Then I go home to watch it to see if maybe it was funny after they played it. And they changed the intro. Somewhere along the line, he re-recorded the intro to the man who's been fired more times than you've had hot dinners. Nice touch. You want to make the crack? Make it while I'm standing there. Don't wait till I leave, you coward. And I'll point out once again, for most of his tenure at CBS, the executive producer of the Colbert Report was Chris Licht, the guy who destroyed CNN. That fopping idiot, a Joe Scarborough trainee. How much integrity could Stephen Colbert have? If he had any, then he met Chris Licht. It was all sucked into the Chris Licht universe. Not an honest broker. And the more I have reflected on it, the more I think there really was something to the old conservative defensive theory we used to laugh about when the Comedy Central show got successful, in which, if you'll remember, it was a shtick, and once the shtick stopped, the funny stopped. That he was not a liberal pretending to be a stupid conservative. He was a conservative willing to take on the mask of being a stupid conservative so he could use the liberal media base to surreptitiously counter liberal narratives and, more importantly, to counter liberal reality and facts. And as I said, the worst thing about Stephen Colbert is what he ordered his staff to do after they took over for Letterman. The show was not even cold yet. The last Letterman episode was not even cold yet, and the live audience was barely out of the building, and the little post-mortem party had just barely begun at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on that day in the spring of 2015, when Colbert had a literal wrecking crew come in and destroy the entirety of the Letterman set and the entire contents of the theater, the Ed Sullivan Theater. Thousands of seats, or hundreds of seats in the theater that could have gone up as charity auctions, the sets, Paul Schaefer's musical bandstand. Some of these things were retrieved by passersby. These things were thrown out overnight onto Broadway. A guy who happened to have a truck picked up the Paul Schaefer set, contacted me. I bought it from him and donated it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is where I believe it sits to this day. I got one seat out of it. One of the great stagehands who Letterman made into a star, because that's the kind of guy he was, procured me a seat and said, I don't know how much longer they're going to let me have this. They took 2 or 3 away from me earlier today. They were destroying the set because Colbert did not want any possible remembrance of David Letterman. That's who Colbert is. I have no personal problem with him getting canceled and humiliated and, in my mind, forced to work the next 10 months as a lame duck. But the point is, he now has the opportunity to vivisect Donald Trump on CBS every night for the next 43 weeks. And that's the fundamental fact here. Why, if you are canceling somebody because he is criticizing Trump, why, in God's name, would you leave him on the air to continue to criticize Trump for the next 43 weeks? It doesn't make any sense. The bottom line to this is they did not cancel Colbert to please Trump. They are making Trump and his people falsely believe that they canceled Colbert to please Trump when they were going to cancel Colbert anyway. Trump is not the cause of this, not this one time. The other 50 million terrible things he's doing, yes, let's blame him. Let's vivisect him for those things. This is not something he did. This is not something he should be allowed to take credit for in that perverse, brain-dead world of his. Do not give him credit for canceling Stephen Colbert. Hell, this isn't even Stephen Colbert's fault. The audience disappeared. And so Stephen Colbert will too. After 43 weeks as a lame duck, gets to say anything the hell he wants about Trump. How is that obeying in advance? Thurber and the greatest man in the world. Next. To the Master, the work of James Thurber. There is a short film of this story. I don't think it really does it justice. I don't think anything does it justice. Occasionally, real life does do it justice. I've thought I've seen this story playing out in real time in this country almost every day for about 7 years. sit back and relax, if relax is the right word for it, for The Greatest Man in the World by James Thurber. Looking back on it now from the vantage point of 1940, one can only marvel that it had not happened long before it did. The United States of America had been, ever since Kitty Hawk, blindly constructing the elaborate petard by which sooner or later it must be hoist. It was inevitable that someday there would come roaring out of the skies a national hero of insufficient intelligence, background, and character successfully to endure the mounting orgies of glory prepared for aviators who stayed up for a long time or flew a great distance. Both Lindbergh and Byrd, fortunately for national decorum and international amity, had been gentlemen. So had our other famous aviators. They wore their laurels gracefully, withstood the awful weather of publicity, married excellent women, usually of fine family, and quietly retired to private life and the enjoyment of their varying fortunes. No untoward incidents on a worldwide scale marred the perfection of their conduct on the perilous heights of fame. The exception to the rule was, however, bound to occur, and it did, in July 1937 when Jack Pal Smirch, erstwhile mechanic's helper, in a small garage in Westfield, Iowa, flew a second-hand, single-motored, Breasthaven Dragonfly 3 monoplane all the way around the world without stopping. Never before in the history of aviation had such a flight as Smirch's even been dreamed of. No one had even taken seriously the weird floating auxiliary gas tanks, invention of the mad New Hampshire professor of astronomy, Dr. Charles Lewis Gresham, upon which Smirch placed full reliance. When the garage worker, a slightly built, surly, unprepossessing young man of 22, appeared at Roosevelt Field early in July 1937, slowly chewing a great quid of scrap tobacco, and announced, "Nobody ain't seen no flying yet." The newspapers touched briefly and satirically upon his projected 25,000-mile flight. Aeronautical and automotive experts dismissed the idea curtly, implying that it was a hoax, a publicity stunt. The rusty, battered, second-hand plane wouldn't go. The Gresham auxiliary tanks wouldn't work. It was simply a cheap joke. Smirch, however, after calling on a girl in Brooklyn who worked in the flap-folding department of a large paper box factory, a girl whom he later described as his sweet patootie, climbed nonchalantly into his ridiculous plane at dawn of the memorable 7th of July, 1937, spit a curve of tobacco juice into the still air, and took off, carrying with him only a gallon of bootleg gin and 6 pounds of salami. When the garage boy thundered out over the ocean, the papers were forced to record in all seriousness that a mad, unknown young man, his name was variously misspelled, had actually set out upon a preposterous attempt to span the world in a rickety one-engine contraption, trusting to the long-distance refueling device of a crazy schoolmaster. When 9 days later, without having stopped once, the tiny plane appeared above San Francisco Bay, headed for New York, spluttering and choking to be sure, but still magnificently and miraculously aloft, the headlines, which long since had crowded everything else off the front page, even the shooting of the governor of Illinois by the Valetti gang, swelled to unprecedented size, and the news stories began to run to 25 and 30 columns. It was noticeable, however, that the accounts of the epoch-making flight touched rather lightly upon the aviator himself. This was not because the facts about the hero as a man were too meager, but because they were too complete. Reporters who had been rushed out to Iowa when Smirch's plane was first sighted over the little French coast town of Cergy-le-Maire to dig up the story of the great man's life had promptly discovered that the story of his life could not be printed. His mother, A sullen short-order cook in a shack restaurant on the edge of a tourist's camping ground near Westfield met all inquiries as to her son with an angry, the hell with him. I hope he drowns." His father appeared to be in jail somewhere for stealing spotlights and lap robes from tourists' automobiles. His young brother, a weak-minded lad, had but recently escaped from the Preston, Iowa reformatory and was already wanted in several western towns for the theft of money order blanks from post offices. These alarming discoveries were still piling up at the very time that Pal Smerch, the greatest hero of the 20th century, blear-eyed, dead for sleep, half-starved, was piloting his crazy junk heap high above the region in which the lamentable story of his private life was being unearthed, headed for New York and a greater glory than any man of his time had ever known. The necessity for printing some account in the papers of the young man's career and personality had led to a remarkable predicament. It was, of course, impossible to reveal the facts, for a tremendous popular feeling in favor of the young hero had sprung up like a grass fire when he was halfway across Europe on his flight around the globe. He was, therefore, described as a modest chap, taciturn, blonde, popular with his friends, popular with girls. The only available snapshot of Smerch, taken at the wheel of a phony automobile in a cheap photo studio at an amusement park, was touched up so that the little vulgarian looked quite handsome. His twisted leer was smoothed into a pleasant smile. The truth was, in this way, kept from the youth's ecstatic compatriots. They did not dream that the Smerch family was despised and feared by its neighbors in the obscure Iowa town, nor that the hero himself, because of numerous unsavory exploits, had come to be regarded in Westfield as a nuisance and a menace. Pal Smerch had, the reporters discovered, once knifed the principal of his high school. Not mortally, to be sure, but he had knifed him. And on another occasion, surprised in the act of stealing an altar cloth from a church, he had bashed the sexton over the head with a pot of Easter lilies. For each of these offenses, he had served a sentence in the reformatory. Inwardly, the authorities, both in New York and in Washington, prayed that an understanding Providence might, however awful such a thing seemed, bring disaster to the rusty, battered plane and its illustrious pilot, whose unheard-of flight had aroused the civilized world to hosannas of hysterical praise. The authorities were convinced that the character of the renowned aviator was such that the limelight of adulation was bound to reveal him to all the world as a congenital hooligan, mentally and morally unequipped to cope with his own prodigious fame. "I trust," said the Secretary of State at one of the many secret cabinet meetings called to consider the national dilemma, "I trust that his mother's prayer will be answered," by which he referred to Mrs. Emma Smerch's wish that her son might be drowned. It was, however, too late for that. Smerch had leaped the Atlantic and then the Pacific as if they were mill ponds. At 3 minutes after 2 o'clock on the afternoon of July 17th, 1937, the garage boy brought his idiotic plane into Roosevelt Field for a perfect three-point landing. It had, of course, been out of the question to arrange a modest little reception for the greatest flyer in the history of the world. He was received at Roosevelt Field with such elaborate and pretentious ceremonies as rocked the world. Fortunately, however, the worn and spent hero promptly swooned, had to be removed bodily from his plane, and was spirited from the field without having opened his mouth once. Thus, he did not jeopardize the dignity of his first reception, a reception illumined by the presence of the Secretaries of War and the Navy, Mayor Michael J. Moriarty of New York, the Premier of Canada, Governors Fanaman, Groves, McFeely, and Critchfield, and a brilliant array of European diplomats. Smerch did not, in fact, come to in time to take part in the gigantic hullabaloo arranged at City Hall for the next day. He was rushed to a secluded nursing home and confined in bed. It was 9 days before he was able to get up, or to be more exact, before he was permitted to get up. Meanwhile, the greatest minds in the country in solemn assembly had arranged a secret conference of city, state, and government officials, which Smerch was to attend for the purpose of being instructed in the ethics and behavior of heroism. On the day that the little mechanic was finally allowed to get up and dress, and for the first time in 2 weeks took a great chew of tobacco, he was permitted to receive the newspaper men, this by way of testing him out. Smerch did not wait for questions. "Yous guys," he said, and the Times man winced. "Yous guys can tell the cockeyed world that I put it over on Lindbergh, see? Yeah, made an ass of them two frogs." The two frogs was a reference to a pair of gallant French flyers who, in attempting a flight only halfway around the world, had 2 weeks before unhappily been lost at sea. The Times man was bold enough at this point to sketch out for Smerch the accepted formula for interviews in cases of this kind. He explained that there should be no arrogant statements belittling the achievements of other heroes, particularly heroes of foreign nations. "Ah, to hell with that," said Smerch. "I did it, see? I did it, and I'm talking about it." And he did talk about it. None of this extraordinary interview was, of course, printed. On the contrary, the newspapers, already under the disciplined direction of a secret directorate created for the occasion and composed of statesmen and editors, gave out to a panting and restless world that Jackie, as he had been arbitrarily nicknamed, would consent to say only that he was very happy and that anyone could have done what he did. "My achievement has been, I fear, slightly exaggerated," the Times man's article had him protest with a modest smile. These newspaper stories were kept from the hero, a restriction which did not serve to abate the rising malevolence of his temper. The situation was indeed extremely grave, for pal Smerch was, as he kept insisting, rarin' to go. He could not much longer be kept from a nation clamorous to lionize him. It was the most desperate crisis the United States of America had faced since the sinking of the Lusitania. On the afternoon of the 27th of July, Smerch was spirited away to a conference room in which were gathered mayors, governors, government officials, behaviorist psychologists, and editors. He gave them each a limp, moist paw and a brief, unlovely grin. "Hiya," he said. When Smerch was seated, the mayor of New York arose and, with obvious pessimism, attempted to explain what he must say and how he must act when presented to the world, ending his talk with a high tribute to the hero's courage and integrity. The mayor was followed by Governor Fetterman of New York, who, after a touching declaration of faith, introduced Cameron Spottiswoode, second secretary of the American Embassy in Paris, the gentleman selected to coach Smerch in the amenities of public ceremonies. Sitting in a chair with a soiled yellow tie in his hand and his shirt open at the throat, unshaved, smoking a rolled cigarette, Jack Smerch listened with a leer on his lips. I get you, he cut in nastily. "You want me to act like a softy, huh? You want me to act like that mebbity baby face Lindbergh, huh? Well, nuts to that, see?" Everyone took in his breath sharply. It was a sigh and a hiss. "Mr. Lindbergh," began a United States senator, purple with rage, "and Mr. Byrd," Smerch, who was paring his nails with a jackknife, cut in again. "Boyd," he exclaimed. For God's sake, that big—" Somebody shut off the blasphemies with a sharp word. A newcomer had entered the room. Everyone stood up except Smerch, who was still busy with his nails, and he did not even glance up. "Mr. Smerch," said someone sternly, "the President of the United States." It had been thought that the presence of the chief executive might have a chastening effect on the young hero, and the former had been, thanks to the remarkable cooperation of the press, secretly brought to the obscure conference room. A great, painful silence fell. Smerch looked up, waved a hand at the president. "How you coming?" he asked, and began rolling a fresh cigarette. The silence deepened. Someone coughed in a strained way. Geez, it's hot, ain't it? Said Smirch. He loosened 2 more shirt buttons, revealing a hairy chest and the tattooed word Sadie enclosed in a stenciled heart. The great and important men in the room, faced by the most serious crisis in American history, exchanged worried frowns. Nobody seemed to know how to proceed. Come on, said Smirch. Let's get the hell out of here. When do I start cutting in on the parties, huh? And when is there gonna be this in it? He rubbed a thumb and forefinger together meaningly. Money? Exclaimed a state senator, shocked, pale. Yeah, money, said Pal, flipping his cigarette out of the window. And big money. He began rolling a fresh cigarette. Big money, he repeated, frowning over the rice paper. He tilted back in his chair and leered at each gentleman separately. The leer of an animal that knows its power. The leer of a leopard loose in a bird and dog shop. For God's sake, let's get someplace where it's cooler, he said. I've been cooped up plenty for 3 weeks. Smirch stood up and walked over to an open window, where he stood staring down into the street 9 floors below. The faint shouting of newsboys floated up to him. He made out his name. Hot dog, he cried, grinning, ecstatic. He leaned out over the sill. You tell 'em, babies, he shouted down. Hot diggity dog! In the tense little knot of men standing behind him, a quick, mad impulse flared up. An unspoken word of appeal, of command, seemed to ring through the room, yet it was deadly silent. Charles K. L. Brand, secretary to the mayor of New York City, happened to be standing nearest Smirch. He looked inquiringly at the President of the United States. The President, pale, grim, nodded shortly. Brand, a tall, powerfully built man, once a tackle at Rutgers University, stepped forward, seized the greatest man in the world by his left shoulder and the seat of his pants, and pushed him out the window. My God, he's fallen out the window! Cried a quick-witted editor. Get me out of here, cried the president. Several men sprang to his side, and he was hurriedly escorted out of a door toward a side entrance of the building. The editor of the Associated Press took charge, being used to such things. Crisply, he ordered certain men to leave, others to stay. Quickly, he outlined a story which all the papers were to agree on, sent 2 men to the street to handle that end of the tragedy, commanded a senator to sob, and 2 congressmen to go to pieces nervously. In a word, he skillfully set the stage for the gigantic task that was to follow, the task of breaking to a grief-stricken world the sad story of the untimely, accidental death of its most illustrious and spectacular figure. The funeral was, as you know, the most elaborate, the finest, the solemnest, and the saddest ever held in the United States of America. The monument in Arlington Cemetery, with its clean white shaft of marble and the simple device of a tiny plane carved on its base, is a place for pilgrims in deep reverence to visit. The nations of the world paid lofty tributes to little Jackie Smirch, America's greatest hero. At a given hour, there were 2 minutes of silence throughout the nation. Even the inhabitants of the small, bewildered town of Westfield, Iowa, observed this touching ceremony. Agents of the Department of Justice saw to that. One of them was especially assigned to stand grimly in the doorway of a little shack restaurant on the edge of the tourists' camping ground just outside the town. There, under his stern scrutiny, Mrs. Emma Smirch bowed her head over 2 hamburger steaks sizzling on her grill, bowed her head and turned away so that the Secret Service man could not see the twisted, strangely familiar leer on her lips. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Most of our countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, our musical directors of Countdown. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, appears courtesy of ESPN Inc., that is the sports music. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed, and my announcer today was my late friend and hero, George Carlin. Everything else was, as always, my fault. Let's count down for today, day 183 of America Held Hostage. Again, just 1,288 days until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck and lame-brained term, unless he is removed sooner by MAGA and Jeffrey Epstein and the Trumpstein story, or by the original six from baseball. The next scheduled countdown is Monday. Until then, I'm Keith Olbermann. I did want to close with a quick memorial. I told his full story on his birthday last month, but today is 1 year to the day since my great leaping rescue pup, Minet, the guy who came to me just before his 15th birthday without a home, almost comatose. They thought he had all kinds of dementia, and turns out he just had bad teeth. And after we removed them, within months, he was apparently remembering that he could literally jump for joy over the lines on the sidewalks and the streets. I miss him every day. He has been gone 1 year. In his memory, today, just once, jump for joy, even if you have to rationalize some of the joy.